we begin this morning with the verdict in that deadly police shooting in Minnesota. Former police officer Kim Potter was charged with manslaughter in the killing of DAUNTE WRIGHT. And after several days of deliberations yesterday afternoon, the jury reached a decision.
We, the jury, on the charge of manslaughter in the first degree while committing a misdemeanor on or about April 11, 2021, in Hennepin County, state of Minnesota, find the defendant guilty. The verdict on count 2 is we, the jury, on the charge of manslaughter in the second degree, culpable negligence on or about April 11, 2021, in Hennepin County, state of Minnesota, find the defendant guilty.
The verdict was met with a sense of relief for Wright's family and friends. It's the latest high-profile case focused on policing here in America. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster has been following it from the beginning. He joins us now from outside the courthouse in Minneapolis. Shaq, good morning to you. We know the trial was extremely emotional for DAUNTE WRIGHT's family and friends. What was the scene like there when the verdict was read? What was their reaction?
Yeah, you saw different reactions inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, they were listening in, and you heard this group of demonstrators yell out cheers after that first guilty verdict came out, and then that scene repeated itself when it got to the second guilty verdict. There were hugs, there were celebrations. It was a joyous moment almost outside of the courtroom. But inside the courtroom, you didn't see Kim Potter react much. She looked down for a brief second, but you did hear a cry come from DAUNTE WRIGHT's mother, Katie Bryan. I want you to listen to her explanation of why she had so much emotion in that moment.
The moment that we heard guilty on the manslaughter 1, emotions, every single emotion that you could imagine just running through your body at that moment. I kind of let out a yelp because it was built up in the anticipation of what was to come while we were waiting for the last few days.
That anticipation going all the way back to that April 11th traffic stop, then those 27 hours of deliberations that came after about a 3-week-long trial. There was a big moment and a lot of emotion that you saw both inside and outside the courtroom.
So, Shaq, now that Kim Potter has been convicted on both counts of manslaughter, sentencing is going to be in February. Is she potentially facing some significant jail time here?
She is up to 15 years in prison, though it's important to note that sentencing guidelines in this state put that at about half that time, somewhere between 6 and 9 years. However, the prosecution over the next couple of weeks and months will be arguing for so-called aggravating factors, claiming that because of her position of authority, for example, this crime was more egregious, that she should serve something closer to that 15-year period. This is something that's going to be worked out between the defense and prosecution, argued out, I should say, over the next couple of weeks and months. That sentencing date will be on February 18th.
All right, Shaq, thanks so much. Let's get to MSNBC legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden now for more on this guilty verdict in the Kim Potter trial. Kristen, good morning to you. I want to start by getting your reaction to the verdict. Do you think the jury made the right decision here? Were you surprised at all?
I wasn't surprised. I thought the prosecution put on a beautiful case. I think that they put on experts. I think that the police testimony didn't necessarily come out as they thought it would. But again, they put on a great case. They kept the theme very simple. And I think one thing that's really important to point out is that the jurors took their time. 4 days. This was a tough case with very complex legal elements that is tough for lawyers to kind of grasp, very tough for lay people. They took their time, they asked important questions, and they delivered a verdict that they thought was commensurate with the evidence that was put in throughout the trial.
Kristen, when we look back on all the events from the trial, some of which were very emotional, do you think there was a key moment that led to this verdict?
Yeah, I thought there were several key moments. But I think from a legal perspective, putting aside the very emotional and touching testimony from DAUNTE WRIGHT's mom, dad, and his girlfriend at the time, I think the two most important things was the use of force expert put on by the prosecution and Kim Potter's testimony. The use of force expert from the prosecution gave the prosecutor the elements she needed to argue in closing, which, as we see from the jury verdict, was ultimately successful. And I thought Kim Potter, although I thought she needed to testify, it was unhelpful for their case. I
mean, looking back, do you think it was a mistake for her to testify, or do you think she had to in this situation and it just in the end didn't help her?
I think she had to testify. You know, she had to explain that she saw the fear within Sergeant Johnson's eyes, and that's why she made the moves that she did. You know, I think that the direct examination went well, but I thought she wasn't very well equipped for the cross-examination that the prosecutor effectively delivered.
Kristen, I also want to get your reaction to what Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison said to police officers yesterday. Take a listen.
My thoughts are also with those who work in law enforcement and public safety. We hold you in high regard, and we also hold you to high standards. We want you to uphold the highest ideals of our society and ideals of safety. And when a member of your profession is held accountable, it does not diminish you. In fact, it shows. It shows the whole world that those of you who enforce the law are also willing to live by it.
So, Kristen, what do you make of those comments? Do you think this verdict will bring about more changes to policing in America?
Absolutely. You know, as a former prosecutor, former trainer of police officers, I think what is going to happen is there's going to be a lot more emphasis on de-escalation matters and what happens at a traffic stop and when it is appropriate to actually stop someone. Keep in mind, you know, Mr. Wright was stopped for air fresheners and expired tags. And we're talking about during a pandemic when there's a lot more serious things to look into. And so I think there's going to be a lot more efforts on police reform. I think the other thing to point out is that with a jury that was of 9 Caucasians, 2 Asians, and 1 Black American, we now see that policing in America is not just a concern for Black Americans, but for all Americans.
Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you and your family have a great holiday weekend. Now to the pandemic. Cases of the Omicron variant are surging as millions of families across the country are expected to gather for Christmas Eve tonight and Christmas tomorrow. An average of 168,000 Americans are testing positive for COVID every day right now. That's higher than the peak of the Delta variant surge. The demand for testing is also surging, especially in places like New York City. Neighborhood after neighborhood, testing lines are still wrapped around the block as new cases break records. This as the city makes a decision on what to do with the New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square a week from today. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park is in Times Square with the latest. Kathy, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. Well, the New Year's Eve bash here in Times Square is still on, but it will be scaled back due to rising COVID cases. The crowd will be capped to just 15,000, and everyone will be required to wear a mask and be vaccinated.
This morning, surging COVID cases across the country, reminding us a pandemic isn't taking a break this Christmas. In New York, where infections continue to skyrocket, roughly 10,000 at-home tests were handed out, but it's still not enough to keep up with demand, as testing lines in some spots stretch around the block.
I did one yesterday where I waited for 2 hours. It's crazy everywhere around town.
Even as the Omicron variant tightens its grip, a scaled-back New Year's Eve will move ahead in Times Square, where revelers will be masked and fully vaxxed.
I'm all for it. If you're vaccinated, wearing a mask.
Travel is rebounding too. Now through January 2nd, more than 109 million Americans plan on driving or flying to their destinations, a 34% bump from last year.
I guess we didn't want to cancel our plans second year in a row.
But overnight, hundreds of flight cancellations. Delta, United, and Alaska Airlines citing the impact of Omicron on their workforce. And on a Royal Caribbean cruise, 55 passengers and crew tested positive. The cruise line saying they were fully vaccinated and showed mild to no symptoms. As the coronavirus hangs on, health officials say we're in a better position now to fight back. This week, the FDA clearing 2 antiviral COVID pills from Merck and Pfizer.
We have every tool we need to put this pandemic behind us.
And hopeful news from a UK study. Those infected with Omicron were 2/3 less likely to be hospitalized compared to Delta.
And with hospitals feeling the strain once again with this latest wave of COVID cases, the CDC issued some updated guidance for healthcare workers who test positive for the virus and are asymptomatic. They can now shorten their isolation period from 10 days to 7 days and head back to work with a negative test. Joe, back to you.
Kathy Park in Times Square on this Christmas Eve. Let's bring in Dr. Awais Dorani. He's an emergency medicine physician in San Antonio, Texas. Doctor, good to have you with us. Let's talk about the CDC shortening quarantine periods for healthcare workers. If they're asymptomatic, they can return to work after 7 days and a negative test. If they're boosted, they don't need to isolate if they're exposed to a positive case. So what do you think of this guidance? Is it okay, and will it keep you and your colleagues safe? And what about the patients you're treating?
Good morning. Absolutely. I think this is the right call. Every day I go into work, there are more and more physicians, nurses, respiratory technicians that are out, and that makes it more difficult for us to take care of our patients. Healthcare workers in general are mostly vaccinated. We wear masks almost all the time. And then on top of that, we're getting tested. And so you're asymptomatic and you're 7 days out. I think it's the right call to get back to work, and the data supports that. The data supports that we're going to be keeping our patients safe, number one. We're going to be keeping each other safe, and that we're going to be able to care for the patients that show up. I think it's also time to see if this is expandable to other kind of critical infrastructure. So airline employees, police officers, and other kind of core groups of individuals that make sure that our society keeps running.
Something tells me this might evolve as we learn more about Omicron. I want to ask you about new data from the UK suggesting booster protection against symptomatic Omicron cases wanes, specifically with the mRNA vaccine. So for people who were given 3 Pfizer doses, vaccine effectiveness dropped from 70% to 45% in 10 weeks. But Pfizer recipients who got a Moderna booster still had 75% effectiveness after 9 weeks. Lots of numbers there, but what does all this mean? Should people be concerned about the level of protection they got from their booster?
Yeah, so this is not really surprising. If you look at that initial data from Israel back in around September or so, when we were initially distributing boosters, we saw a huge surge in protection against symptomatic disease, and then that waned over the upcoming weeks. But the protection against severe disease, hospitalizations, and deaths still maintained. And so I'm optimistic that we're still going to continue to have that protection against severe disease. On top of that, we've said from the beginning that there is no one tool that's going to end this pandemic. And so vaccines are a cornerstone of the strategy to end this pandemic, but we have to continue to layer other measures on top of that, which include masks, testing, and other mitigation measures to protect us from that symptomatic disease. But I'm optimistic that the worst of the consequences of COVID-19 you're going to be protected against that if you're vaccinated.
So, doctor, for families hoping to gather for Christmas or New Year's next week, what's your advice? How can they see their loved ones, spend time with them, and still feel safe?
Absolutely. So the simple answer is get vaccinated, get boosted, wear a mask, and get tested before gatherings. We all know the reality of getting tests is very, very difficult, and they're hard to find. And so 2 tips. If you're getting together with your family and you have a few tests, say 5 tests, get the person who's the highest exposure risk tested. So that's not grandma and grandpa who've been isolating at home for most of the pandemic. That's going to be the college students who come back 2 days before the gathering. Second tip, if you're going to multiple gatherings, get tested before the gathering where you're going to be in contact with the highest risk individuals. And so if you're going to be in a gathering with younger, healthier people, maybe don't get tested. But if you're going to be around grandparents or immunocompromised, get tested. And so unfortunately, we're going to have to learn how to use these tests in a smart way throughout the pandemic. But I think that'll kind of provide some guidance. And most of all, happy holidays. You know, we've spent much time without our families, especially last winter, and we get to see our families this time around. And so enjoy that.
All right. Dr. Awais Dorani, wishing you a happy holidays as well. Thanks so much for taking some time on this holiday morning to offer some important advice to everyone. We appreciate it. Now, if you're not flying this holiday, you might be among the millions of drivers who are gearing up to hit the road. So what can you expect to see on your way to Grandma's house? Well, state troopers are out in droves trying to rein in speeders and distracted drivers. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has more.
Eager for a Christmas escape, Americans have been on the move from I-95 to I-5 east to west, I-90 to I-10 north to south. Madison crews opting to drive 700 miles to avoid potential COVID exposure while flying.
The potential of taking it home to our families who are all coming from different places is just too much of a risk.
Gas prices higher than last year, but coming down. Unleaded now averaging $3.29 a gallon. A 500-mile trip from Dallas to Kansas City costing $66 in gas, $2 cheaper than a Thanksgiving. In Virginia, State Trooper Sean Hovenden on watch.
Can you mark me out with a disabled vehicle?
A top concern nationwide, distracted, impaired driving, and speed. Speeding surged 11% last year, pushing a big spike in fatal crashes. Virginia drivers recently ticketed for doing 106, 115, even 140 miles per hour. A trooper who'd stopped a speeder escaped injury after his car was hit by an allegedly impaired driver. The same happened to Trooper Hovenden, hit by a distracted driver.
He rolled his vehicle upside down and landed next to me. Luckily, he had minor scratches.
Meanwhile, from clogged roads to clogged airports, the TSA reports screening 2 million passengers Wednesday, slightly more than pre-pandemic 2019.
We're all vaccinated, we all got our boosters.
A Newark TSA officer is being hailed as a hero. A veteran EMT, Cecilia Morales, climbed over a TSA belt to perform the Heimlich and save a choking baby. Yeah, thank goodness for faster-thinking TSA officers. Meanwhile, here in Northern Virginia, state police were involved in a chase late Thursday. A suspect hit one of their state trooper vehicles with an officer inside and rolled the vehicle. Other officers gave chase. They eventually caught up with the suspect. The officer taken to a nearby hospital in good condition, we're told, but it really underscores the exact risk we've been talking about with speed, with distracted driving, perhaps impairment being something that's a constant concern for troopers out on the roads nationwide. I'm Tom Costello in Arlington, Virginia. Back to you.
A reminder to be safe out there. Tom Costello, thanks so much. Now, if you feel like something is missing this holiday season, it might be the lack of snow on the ground. The chance of a white Christmas is slim this year for many. That means no snowmen or sleigh rides after all the gifts are unwrapped. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda takes a look at what's causing the unusually warm winter and why a snowy holiday might be a thing of Christmas past.
Holiday classics may need a rewrite as the chance for snow on Christmas seems to be melting.
Christmas Day will be sunny and bright.
The first week of winter bringing forecast highs near 50 degrees in New York and 60 in Denver, which recently saw its latest first snow in 87 years.
It's really hard to get in the holiday spirit when it's not snowy.
It makes me feel a little disappointed.
Many shelving their hats and gloves over the holiday as the majority of cities in the U.S. see a decreased chance of a white Christmas. Climate scientists at NOAA looked at 1,500 locations and found differences in the last decade are consistent with the reality of long-term warming. In the 1980s, nearly half of the country had snow on the ground on Christmas. In recent years, that number was below 40%.
Are our chances for a white Christmas drying up?
Yes, in many areas of the country, they are. A lot of people scratching their head as to why they're going to wake up on Christmas morning for perhaps 5, 6, 7 years in a row without snow.
Like snowflakes, the changes may be subtle with big implications. Odds of snow for Santa down 3% in Des Moines, Iowa, 4% in our nation's capital, and 6% in Denver.
These trends that we're seeing in extreme weather, like snowfall or lack thereof, are all really fundamentally being changed by climate, and they're being changed in very small ways that actually accumulate up to big impacts.
A difference that means that white Christmas may be a thing of the past. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
That story sets us up perfectly for your morning news now. Weather, as we heard, many across the country won't be experiencing a white Christmas. In fact, for some, the weather outside is delightful rather than frightful. Good news, Bill Cairns is with us on this Christmas Eve day morning. Bill, good to see you.
Hey, great to see you, Joe, on this Christmas Eve. And guess what? It snowed at my house last night, and I have an inch, and it's only going to last like 2 hours and melt, so it's not going to quite be a white Christmas. And that'll be the case for a lot of people that were just north of New York City. I'm in northern New Jersey. I know people in Connecticut have slick roads, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, upstate New York, and Albany. So it snowed about an inch to an inch and a half in many areas. So be careful heading out the door in those areas. But let's take you out west where the monster storm systems are moving through. So the first one's heading through Southern California. A good dose of rain. I mean, when it's raining in Phoenix, you know you got a pretty significant storm system you're dealing with. And now we're going to watch another band of heavy rain that's going to push back towards Los Angeles during the early mornings here. So this is where all the worst weather is if you're flying today, especially Los Angeles Airport, LAX, heading out to Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. And then we're going to watch another storm right through the holiday weekend impacting the Pacific Northwest, and that'll slowly slide down towards San Francisco as we head through the weekend. So rainfall totals, pretty epic in the mountains, but of course in the mountains, most of that falls as snow. So we are going to be watching, we've been saying it all week, upwards possibility of 4 or 5 feet, isolated up to 100 inches, which is like 8 to 10 feet. So, I mean, this is exactly what we needed going into this year. This is perfect. We're starting to fill up those reservoirs significantly. We're not recovering from a 10-year drought and, in a couple storms, but this is a good dent. We're great, that we're heading in the right direction. So for today, the storm in the southwest weakens and heads into Phoenix, also towards Albuquerque. The storm in the northwest is going to still bring some areas of heavy rain today. Tonight, Santa's going to struggle tonight, especially around Tahoe and Reno. I mean, Rudolph's red nose is going to have to really glare through that snow. It's going to be coming down hard. San Francisco going to have periods of heavy rain right through Christmas Day. So just be prepared for your travel plans for that. So forecast-wise at the airports, Los Angeles today and Phoenix and in Vegas, some of the worst of the airports. Notice, Joe, everything in the east today, everyone should be able to get to Christmas. No problems whatsoever. That is, if the airlines didn't already cancel your flight, though, because of COVID issues. So if it's not one thing, it seems to be the other, doesn't it?
Yeah, no kidding. But, Bill, you got your Christmas gift, a little bit of snow, but it sounds like you don't have to shovel.
No. That's right. It's perfect snow. Perfect.
All right. Sounds good. Happy holidays, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.